Hi, this is Peter Bracke, author of the book Crystal Lake Memories. I'll be your host for the next 90 minutes as we return to Camp Crystal Lake and look back at the making of the original and still unparalleled Friday the 13th. Here's Sean S. Cunningham, producer and director of Friday the 13th.
So in 1980, I'm trying to figure out how to support my kids and my wife and my house and my rent and all that other stuff. And I make this picture called Friday the 13th, which is meant just to be a potboiler to keep the lights on. It's done so much more than that. The most important thing you can do in a film career is make money. Because if you make money, people will let you make more films and take other chances, and nobody will blame them. So I've had a lot of opportunities given to me as a result of doing this one little film in New Jersey. And I can't imagine that I'm talking about making this little film 20 years later, at a point in time when the kids I was trying to feed then have both gone to college and done all that stuff as a result of Friday the 13th and its related activities. And for all I know, oh God help them, my kids may be producing Friday the 13th movies long after I'm gone.
Peter Bracke, author of Crystal Lake Memories. What I find fascinating about Sean Cunningham is, and this is based on interviews he's given, is that he always saw filmmaking as a business proposition more than an artistic one. And that's not to say, it's not to say that he didn't want to make a good movie and a quality movie, but in every interview, his modus operandi was to make a movie that was successful enough to make enough money so he could make another one. So he was always looking for the next sort of hot commercial concept at the time. And he started out, actually, he made a film called Together, which was an adult film with Wes Craven. That was in the late 60s, and that, of course, capitalized on the then huge porn boom with films like Behind the Green Door and Deep Throat. Bill Frieda, editor.
In New York City at the time, there weren't that many movies coming around here, certainly. And the only way you kind of broke into that business of getting into something was to make a low-budget movie. I mean, people were making porn movies were very big here in that period of time. And so anything that could get you into dialogue, talking, could put you into a position where maybe you might get noticed.
Peter Bracke. Then Last House on the Left came about, which of course capitalized on the late 60s, early 70s wave of more graphic horror films like Night of the Living Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Then in the near the late 70s, and which many people find kind of surprising, is he did a couple of children's films, which were produced to capitalize on the success of Bad News Bears. But if you look at, again, at the way he approached film, it's not at all surprising that he would do such disparate movies, because he was simply making movies based on what was popular at the time. And then when Friday the 13th came about, it was mainly because the two children's films he did, Manny's Orphans and Here Comes the Tigers, didn't do very well. So, of course, as we all know the legend now, he took out a full-page ad and simply had the block letters, Friday the 13th, smashing through a piece of glass, and the tagline, the scariest movie ever made. And at that point, he didn't even have a script. All he had was a title. Of course, as the story goes, the phones rang off the hook, and he approached a couple of backers in Boston by the name of Steve Manasian and Philip Studeri to back the film. And again, it was purely a case of Halloween's big. Let's make a horror movie. They're popular right now, and hopefully this one will be a hit. Sean S. Cunningham.
All this interest is in a film called Friday the 13th. We didn't know what it was. So I called my friend Victor Miller, who had worked on these two children's films with me, and I said, have you ever made a scary movie? Do you want to make a horror film? And he said, sure, but I've never done one.
Victor Miller, screenwriter.
I have to confess, I'm not really a horror film aficionado. I'm an absolute wuss when it comes to horror. I saw Psycho and refused to take a shower for years, and so I'm not a long-term student of horror films.
Victor Miller was a very accomplished writer by the time he wrote Friday the 13th. He had a good 10, 15 years. He wrote a number of novels, screenplays, and television.
I am often fond of saying that if I could have chosen the movie that I would have written for success, I would like to have written Airplane. That's who I really am, but by mistake somehow, Friday the 13th happened.
So we sat around a kitchen table and just sort of made a list of things that we thought were really scary, and how could we for just try to strip away all of the frills and all the stuff that was unnecessary and get right down to the heart of what would have been basically a story told around a campfire, designed just to scare you.
So I went to see Halloween, and I went to school basically on the movie Halloween, saw it once, figured out what a good horror film would need, and then Sean and I talked about all the possible venues and the places, you know, that it could be, and I came up with summer camp. Oh, and the other thing I learned from Halloween is that if you make love, you get killed. So I had to figure out a way to do that. I needed a prior evil, and somehow that idea of the little boy drowning and while allegedly being watched by camp counselors, that came to me, and then of course that made the villain very easy to figure out. I mean, I didn't start with a sort of full-blown idea of the woman. I was basically working, what kind of an evil can we have? I mean, in Michael Myers' case, you know, he's doing in The Babysitter and that kind of thing. So then when he gets out, you know, so I was looking for a prior evil, and then that just sort of bubbled up from my horrible psyche.
One of the real scary things that goes on in horror films, I came to the conclusion that the dynamic of it comes from something Bruno Bettelheim observed about fairy tales, is that you take something that really scares you, but you don't want to talk about it, and then you dress it up and put it in the story. When you take it out and look at it, it becomes less scary. So Hansel and Gretel, you know, lets you deal with the fact that your parents are going to leave you, and that there is a hostile world out there that wants to destroy you and eat you up, as it were. And by telling that story again and again, we, as listeners, say, okay, and each time you hear it, it's a little less scary, and it's a little less scary.
That's far, huh?
The ways that the killings happened were mostly based on nightmares I'd had as a child. I had no primal stories in mind whatsoever for Friday the 13th other than this mother, because I have another confession to make. I never went to summer camp because I chickened out. I was such a wuss, I gotta tell you, that I didn't want to go there, I didn't want to deal with all of that stuff, and so I never went to summer camp. But I think there must be some sort of archetype, you know, where I certainly was raised with a boogeyman. I was raised in the South, in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I was told from the first moment I could understand that the boogeyman was going to get me. In this case, it's a boogie woman.
What I specifically think is at the heart of most of these popular stories is a fear of untimely death. And this comes from, I think, as teenagers, we think of ourselves as invulnerable. You know, bad things happen to other people, but to us, nothing. And everybody has that story of somebody in their high school class who got a motorcycle or something and hit a tree and died. And the school is in shock. This couldn't happen. But it does, because that event calls into sharp focus the fact that we are vulnerable, that we have possible problems, but we put them out of our mind. In going to a horror film, it's kind of a safe place to look at those fears. It's similar to a roller coaster, where you're in the safety of the roller coaster with the bar and with the straps and all the other stuff that's there. And then you go someplace really high and you're dropped down, apparently out of control, but then you come back and you scream and you yell and so on. And it's a similar dynamic.
I saw the structure very, very simply. I mean, because I was working from Mrs. Voorhees' point of view, always. I mean, even though she doesn't come until the end of the picture, and we couldn't have afforded Betsy Palmer for any longer than that anyway, but the point of Friday the 13th to me, as I was writing it, was this is a mother who was taking care of her son, who was long since dead, of course, but that she was avenging something that really bad that had happened to him. And so she basically had to take them where she could get them one by one until she got rid of all of them. I mean, that was clearly her goal, was to keep Crystal Lake from ever opening again and hurting any other children. I mean, this was the mother that I never had, the one who would protect you and go to any horrible lengths to do it. And so I was kind of cheered by that. And that was for me, that was the structure. And of course, then as you look at it basically now from the camper's point of view, they have to watch themselves be thinned out one by one. But of course, the key to that obviously is to keep everybody ignorant. That's the hardest job of all is to have two people not know that everybody else is missing, and it really becomes kind of that kind of architectural job of saying, let's not make them look too stupid. And so we went ahead. Took me about 2 weeks to write the screenplay. So I basically worked it through, gave the first draft to Sean. We had a wonderful working relationship, he and I. I think we played to each other's strengths in the best possible ways. We had a shorthand after doing those other two movies, and I'd written some other things, and we'd come up with treatments together. So we had this kind of shorthand that we could just go bing, 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 and I knew exactly what he meant. He's the only producer or director I've ever worked with who could say to me, make this scene better. And I knew exactly what he meant, because otherwise it's not very helpful. And so that worked really well.
Peter Bracke. What was interesting about the casting process is at the time, it was a little unusual in that the film was being cast and based out of New York. So Barry Moss and Julie Hughes of TNI Casting at the time really were pulling from a theater background more than a film background. So most of the people in Friday the 13th actually had quite an appreciable amount of experience in theater. For example, Robbie Morgan, who plays Annie in the film, had worked she was a child actress in the theater, had done a number of musicals and long-running plays. Mark Nelson was also very accomplished in the theater. And then with Adrienne King, that was a case of they had a huge casting call with, I think, over 1,000 girls. And she had no SAG card. And really no previous acting experience except for a cameo in Saturday Night Fever. So that was also very unusual for the time, is that they were able to get a lead girl who really had no experience whatsoever, which is another example of how the series was really able to give talent a start that probably would not have had a shot otherwise. Adrienne King, who played Alice.
The summer of '79, every actor and actress that was under 21 was like trying to get an audition. There was a lot of buzz going on about it. And I had some nice friends who knew Barry Moss, and he introduced me, and I met with Sean. Then I came back for, callback, and then another callback, and they kept on weeding us down. We didn't have a script, It was a little difficult to audition because they had a few little pieces of monologues, just little, like the one that Janine does about the blood shower dream. Remember that one? That was one of the audition monologues.
Sean S. Cunningham.
The chances that Friday the 13th would launch a career are between slim and none, but you don't realize that at the time. I think that you can do very well in a horror film if you've got something going on behind the eyes. The best example I can think of is Jamie Curtis, who in Halloween made herself a star. She had enough going on underneath that she became interesting, which transcended the material. And that's what I think that anybody who gets into a low-budget film for career reasons is looking to do, is to try to find a way to transcend the material. But unless the material is good, it's very difficult.
Well, I do remember on the screen test that they wanted a lot of reaction shots, a lot of screams, and Sean was working opposite me, and okay, this is what you're seeing right now. This is some bodies flying through the window. Okay, your reaction. Basically all my improv training really paid off at that point.
Victor Miller.
I think the real sort of iconoclastic part of Friday the 13th was taking Mom and Apple Pie and standing it upside down and saying, you've never seen a mother like this, unless it was Ma Barker and Sherry North or something like that, who's absolutely insane. And she's going around macheting people. I mean, she's doing things that no human mother could ever do.
Betsy Palmer, who played Mrs. Voorhees.
You really needed somebody that looked like they could throw that body through the window and all of that. And I remember I wore underwear, long johns underneath, which was nice because of the cold, and a couple of sweaters. And of course, it's always a man's foot and a man's trousers and everything, because it was Tommy Savini's assistant, a young Greek boy who who did me all through the film. I'm there the last 15 minutes of even that. I guess, I don't know whether it was that they wanted a name, I suppose. Well, I did have a name, no, because of TV and all of that. The image always was, especially when I would be doing the Today Show with Dave Garroway and Jack Lasculi and all, and I've Got a Secret, and I did Masquerade Party before that with Ogden Nash and Peter Donald and all. And the image always was of me was that I was this girl next door. And of course, I've always said that there wasn't a gal that ever lived next door to me that I wanted to be like, you know. But that wasn't really who I was. That was a piece of the pie, this image. I'm easy, I get along, I'm flexible, I'm malleable, I get along with people. And yet that makes everybody say, oh, she's Miss Goody Two-Shoes, you know. And as a result, I had a terrible mouth when it came to telling jokes and things. Gary Moore used to say, just look. I would give a joke, you know, that would be, whatever, a little off color or whatever, maybe a lot off color, who knows. I was always trying to prove that I wasn't the girl next door. And Gary would say, just look at that face, the face of an angel, and what comes out of her mouth, you know. But that has always been the case. And people, once they get to know this other side of me, they like it a lot, you know. And I like being that, but I am the other too. And I was cast in roles, usually. I rarely played the bitch. And for this movie to have come along was, again, I suppose, part of the whole plan and the framework of everything as far as my whole career was concerned. I was on Broadway at the time doing the last year and a half of Same Time Next Year.
Victor Miller, screenwriter.
I had seen Betsy Palmer in a lot of movies in the late 40s, I think, or 50s. But the only one I can remember, I think, was Mr. Roberts, where she was outstanding in that.
You know who they asked first was Estelle Parsons. Estelle was asked first to do it. At least that's what I was told. And Estelle said, no way, you know. But she was doing Bonnie and Clyde and things like that. And Estelle is a bigger gal than I am. I mean, I'm tall, but I'm not as hefty.
Betsy Palmer, the actress, I met her once. Basically, when Sean was considering her for the role, I drove over with him to her house. She lives in Connecticut, or lived in Connecticut at the time. And we had a wonderful sit down with a cup of coffee, and she'd read the script and talked about what a pleasure it was to be reading this Grand Guignol, as she called it. And so she was obviously into the fun of it at that time.
Peter Bracke. Well, I mean, the interesting thing about Betsy Palmer, of course, is that she was considered a girl next door type. She's certainly not the type of actress you'd initially think of as a psychotic killer. Friday the 13th, along with Halloween, really helped start a trend, which was when you made a low-budget horror film, you tried to find an older actor or actress who of some notoriety to be in your film to give it more of a higher profile. For example, Halloween had Donald Pleasance. Betsy Palmer was in Friday the 13th. So by getting her into the film, it gave the film a little bit more of a cachet with older viewers and a little more of a prestigious air, even though it was low budget. So at least they could say starring Betsy Palmer as opposed to a complete cast of unknowns. Although some people, for example, Barry Moss, feel the film missed its best bet with Betsy Palmer in the sense that when she finally appears on screen, she's so rather butch and mannish that it sort of destroys her girl next door quality. Some people felt it might have been scarier if, you know, when she shows up, she's this nice apple pie old woman. You think, how on earth could this woman be a killer? But now in the film, when she shows up, the minute she appears on screen, you're like, oh, it's the killer, because she's so, you know, completely, obviously psychotic at that point. And they also cut her hair very short. They gave her a very masculine kind of look with a sweater and very bulky. So it's kind of ironic that they would cast her against type and then not use that type. But other than that, it did work very well because it generated a lot of controversy for the film. It certainly outraged a lot of her older fans who felt she shouldn't do a film like this.
You know, there was one of them, Siskel and Ebert. One of them was fit to be tied because I had done this movie. How dare I let my viewing audience down by playing this a horrible woman. All I know is he said, you write to her and just tell her you know what you did. So there were people who were disappointed in me. But you know, you can't go through life worrying about that.
And actually, what's interesting about that is a lot of other critics actually came out against Gene Siskel because of that. It's one thing to bash a film and criticize it. It's another thing to actually publish, you know, a well-known actress's number and incite people to go and protest her.
I am shocked that a critic would put Betsy Palmer's address in a review and say that she should be chastised by the rank and file. That's a horrible thing. I mean, if you don't like a movie, just say you don't like it. But I don't think that kind of, that's ghastly.
Well, the funny thing is he actually published the wrong address too. So she had someone told her, I think years later, she had said, she had no idea because she never got a single letter. The nice thing about the first two Friday the 13th films is that they were both filmed on the East Coast in actual camp locations versus the sequels, which were formed in California. So, you know, they tend to feel fake, and it's obvious when you watch them that you're nowhere near the East Coast. But in the first, especially in the first Friday the 13th, it feels really real. You know, this is a real camp. It's an authentic location. So I think that adds a lot to the creepiness and the scariness of the film. So I think it was a really good move on their part to actually film on the East Coast. But other than that, it's a pretty unremarkable location. Everything they had was there. They didn't have to build any sets. Certainly saved money. Virginia Field, the art director, did change a few of the sets around. I think the bathroom scene where Marcy gets killed with the axe in her face was partially built to kind of make it a little bit more creepy, but for the most part, everything was live on location. The film was filmed in New Jersey at a camp called Camp No-Be-Bo-Sco, which actually is still in operation today, and from what I understand, they actually have a little wall of like Friday the 13th paraphernalia. It's kind of ironic that a Boy Scout summer camp would be using this film to promote it as like a tourist attraction and, you know, as a way to get kids to come to this camp. Victor Miller, screenwriter.
But otherwise, we were off and running, and we were working against an incredible deadline because this was all supposed to be in the spring, and Sean was up and running on the production of it, and the leaves at the location where he was shooting the movie were turning brown, and so at some points, I guess in the actual shooting, they were putting ropes around branches and pulling them out of the way so that it wouldn't give it away that it was really fall that we're shooting.
Betsy Palmer, who played Mrs. Voorhees.
I got up in the old car and drove up to Crystal Lake. And I see the sign, and I'm saying, and it's toward the end of the day, and I say, well, that's a good omen, because I used to spend all my summers as a little girl at a Crystal Lake in Warsaw, Indiana. So I said, oh, that's all right. And it's also like September. And it got cold. In fact, some of the nights it snowed. And we couldn't shoot outside because it's supposed to be summer camp.
Sean S. Cunningham, producer and director.
The entire cast, there was not one person that ever really complained about how cold it was and wet and just dreadful.
Adrienne King, who played Alice.
I know a lot of the crew stayed at the actual camp. I know that we used the facilities there a lot. We ate at the cafeteria with the tray coming around town. You know, those were where meals were served. Everybody on set just had this great energy that they knew something special was happening. That's really the bottom line on this one. I can tell you there was just this excitement.
The wonderful part about making a movie at that point in your career, in everybody's career, is that we were so thrilled just to be seeing an image, you know, and we'd look at a dailies and it had color and sound and look, that's me, and it's a wonderful place to be, because the thing about being jaded and spoiled and all that other stuff, which can certainly be a part of our industry, comes in later. This is young filmmaking by young people.
I loved working with Sean. I really did. Sean's a good director, good producer. I found the crew wonderful.
Jay Cooper, assistant editor.
It was, you know, a very family type of thing. Sean worked with the same people for many years and pulled them all together. And even as he went and did bigger and better things, he kept the same people around.
We were also, all the kids in the movie, we were just so thrilled to be working there, and there was just a real camaraderie about it. You know, everybody was just so happy to be doing something that was fun. I mean, it was a blast. We had a good time on the set.
Sean got very, very good performances out of these people, I think. Sean had spent a lot of time in the theater, so I think he was most comfortable working with actors and kind of indicating to them what he wanted.
Betsy Palmer.
That was one thing that Sean was very good about. One of the directions that he gave me that was really important, because Jack Nicholson had made, the one where they're up at that wonderful place in Colorado, The Shining. And of course, when he's down in the maze, he's going, and you want to do that. You want to all of a sudden get very kind of, I'm that bad lady. And I was beginning to do that, and Sean would say, no, Betsy. Remember Jack Nicholson, remember how bad that was in the maze. He said, you just do. He said, just play it straight. That's all. So that's what I did.
Sean S. Cunningham.
There's a technique that has become kind of a cliche, which is the stalker POV that I used in Friday the 13th, and in fact, John Carpenter certainly used before I did. And it's the notion that that there is an unexplained, unexpected person in the story. And that by switching to that point of view, you can, or you used to be able to, create a certain kind of anxiety, because the camera is in the wrong place, and it's telling you non-verbally that there's somebody else possibly present. And with that, I think is one of the many devices that we used to try to increase the tension. That we, the audience, have information that the characters don't have. And so that whereas the character might just wander into the equipment shack thinking everything is fine, we're saying, no, there's somebody out there, don't you see? And that, that's that dynamic.
Victor Miller.
The function of Crazy Ralph in the screenplay Friday the 13th is to set the tone for this horrible geographic area. That Crystal Lake and the environs is a place where weird things happen, and so he's kind of like a Greek chorus who comes in and says things aren't what they seem here. Don't count on anything. You can have a guy. Originally, Crazy Ralph was called Ralphie Rat Boy because he was carrying these dead rats around, and so he's kind of the signpost that says, "Watch out." And of course, you've already seen that the area is not exactly cool, because you know that the first girl has been murdered by that time. But he's that Greek chorus that says, "If you know what's good for you, get back on the bus."
Peter Bracke. The first character we meet is actually Annie, and Victor Miller has stated that he was very aware of Psycho when he created this. It's sort of a nod to the Janet Leigh character, in the sense that initially you think, well, Annie is the lead of the film, and actually she isn't. She's killed, 15 minutes into it. So it's sort of a fake out in the tradition of Psycho. Now, a lot of people complain that it didn't work, that it was clear that she was going to get killed, but as many people that I know thought she was the lead, and was really surprised when she was murdered.
One thing that worked really, really well with this film is we basically shot in continuity. The way it was shot was pretty much how it unfolded.
If you read the screenplay, really the only sort of logic I think they're concerned with is the actual scare sequences. I think it's all about just kind of coming up with a sketchy sort of situation to get kids isolated and alone in a scary place. And the film's real focus is on those 7 or 8 key scare sequences, where one by one people are picked off. It's very similar to Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians. Even in those films, the characters tend to be very sketchily drawn. This isn't a character study. And I don't think anyone in this kind of film wants to sit with characters for an hour and really come to like them and love them, and then watch them get killed. That would just be depressing. So you have to sort of just set up really basic archetypes that people can relate to, and that you kind of like and root for, but that you don't like too much. So while I can understand the criticisms that it's poorly made, I don't think so. I think that both Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller knew very well what kind of film they were making. And they knew that, they looked at Halloween, realized you have to create a basic setup, but you can't overdo it. And you can't You know, this isn't a big drama with big scenes and big emotional arcs. It's a popcorn movie. And so it's about the roller coaster ride. It's about setting up situations where you slowly go up the hill, you get to the top, you have that few seconds where you know the bad thing's going to come, and then you drop off and you have that cathartic thrill, which in this case were the gore shots, or the payoffs. But you have to have that payoff. And then you go back and you do it again. It's just a bunch of hills and valleys. Sean S. Cunningham.
We needed to have surprising but long, attenuated moments that would have a moment of surprise in them. And that was the goal, rather than saying we have to have extreme gore, we have to go all the way past the line, we have to push the envelope. We were trying to see how long we could maintain suspense, I think suspense was the goal more than gross out. We surely felt we wanted to have a couple of, things, and Jason coming out of the lake at the end was meant to be that, but we never, it really took a while to get that right. You know, if you tip it off, it just won't work. And so I tried to figure out how to make that moment really work best. For sure, I knew we had to, the ghost story is over, so you can turn on the lights. So Dawn comes up, and she's on this beautiful placid lake. And then I decided that I needed to, make sure that the audience felt safe and that she was safe. And did that in two ways. One is I had some cops running along the shoreline in the background to create that sense of safety. It was shot very idyllically, and then Harry Manfredini laid the music out so that it just mellowed you out. But when the kid comes up out of the bottom of the lake, it comes up musically at a point where it's also unexpected. And it was only when all of those things came together, then you had the audience. And that moment, the dynamics of that have been copied any number of times, and consequently, anytime you even come near it, everybody says, "Oh yeah, I know what you guys are up to." It was so much fun at first because I think it's probably the biggest scare I've ever seen in a movie theater.
Adrienne King.
With the ending in the canoe, he didn't get it the first time. And that was somewhere in September, and so we had to shoot it again. And we didn't get it that time, and this was later in September. But he knew what he wanted. He kept on saying to me, "We're going to get it, we're going to get it." And finally, I think it was the last day of shooting. He had a slow-mo camera, he had a couple of cameras, but I always remember we were in the little cafeteria before dawn, because it was, and we're waiting on the warmers, where they keep the food hot. We're all sitting up on those warmers, and we hear the little local radio station going, "And it's 28 degrees outside." And I'm going, "Sean, are you sure we want to do this again?" He goes, "We're going to get it. We're going to get it right. Don't worry about it. This is it." So he didn't, and he got it. God, he got it.
The part of Jason was meant to be played by my son, Noel, who was at the time, 10 or 11 years old, I think. And he thought it would be just fun. However, when his mother found out that what would be involved with forgetting about missing school, but that, it was cold. I mean, there was damn near ice on the lake, and that you'd have to get in and stay under the water and do all this stuff. She was having no part of it. If I wanted to go out and do that, that was fine. So we wound up hiring Ari Lehman, who had been in the Manny's Orphans thing as a, one of the gang of no good kids running around. He came out and did it, and we wound up, I think we had to shoot that on 3 different days. We had to get them under the water had to be quiet, and they have to be in exactly the right position, and the sun and the cops, and everything had to be perfect. And then you'd shoot it, and of course he would pull her into the water, and that was it for the day. You might get one more shot, but he'd have to get all warmed up, but it was a complete makeover for her. We'd have to dry the clothes, the hair, put on makeup, do the whole thing. At that point, the light would be shot. And so we we shot it. It wasn't until we shot it the third time, and I think that we went back, when we went back to shoot it the third time, I think it may have been middle to late October. It was getting on, and it was cold. We went out and we finally got the shot that's in the movie, and I'm really glad we did.
Another thing that Friday the 13th I think really did that was really important, at least in terms of the horror genre, is that for the first time it made the makeup artist the star of the show. After this film came out, at least in fan circles, everyone knew who Tom Savini was. This guy suddenly, after this film, was getting tons of offers for other slasher films, and he started going on talk shows. And for example, on The Burning, the film he did after Friday the 13th, for the first time in history, the filmmakers sent him out as part of the publicity tour for the film. So suddenly you had makeup artists, going on TV talking about what they were doing. And that was the first time that had ever happened. I mean, you had people like Dick Smith, for example, with The Exorcist, who received quite a bit of acclaim. But now suddenly you had films where the star was the gore effects. And so suddenly people wanted to know, well, who's doing the makeup? And that's something you never had before. So just, it wasn't like, well, gee, who's starring in Friday the 13th Part 3? It's like, well, who's doing the cool gore effects? So that film certainly catapulted Tom Savini to a whole new level, and the makeup artist to a whole new level.
The murders, as I remember them, were pretty much scripted when Tom Savini came. I remember the day he came to Sean's house in Connecticut one afternoon, and it was absolutely fascinating. But if anything, he enriched what was already there, because he would be looking through my screenplay and be saying, well, I noticed you have a hatchet in the face on page 38 or whatever it was. And he turned to Sean and said, do you want a fake face and a real hatchet, or you want a fake hatchet and a real face? I'm going like this. I mean, he's just going boom, 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 because he was so skilled at his craft that it was really fun to talk to. And he gave me the sense in subsequent drafts that I could go further, I could do more, I could have more fun with it. So I think the how-tos were pretty much there, the rough outlines, but what gave them that kind of real juice and life, or death, the irony, was that Savini just said, anything's possible, don't hold yourself back.
When Tom Savini arrived, he arrived with his truck and his assistant Tasso and a chinchilla, and a bunch of makeup, and basically he didn't leave till we wrapped the movie, and he became part of our extended family. He was one of these guys that just could go and go and go. He had this boundless amount of energy, and he was so much fun to be around. His enthusiasm never waned.
It was neat seeing him work, and I remember in Steve Miner's garage, I think, Tom building fake heads of some of the cast members and stuff. And again, it was sort of like, hey, hey kids, we're gonna make a movie, and Tom's gonna do these really neat effects like an axe in the forehead.
I have pictures where he was baking Betsy Palmer's head in the oven. It's like, it was so bizarre. But he just really knew what he was doing, and he shared it. You could watch him making the molds. He was very creative. He knew what he was doing, his special effects, makeup. I mean, he was the one who had done George Romero's movies and had that expertise, but he was also cutting edge. He wanted to try the next thing, go for the, something else. And he was a hoot. He was so much fun to be around. He had so much energy, and like I said, so much talent, man. He made a lot of that movie happen.
To try to decide how you want to do all this stuff in a vacuum is really a fool's errand, because we didn't have the time or the money or the expertise. And to work with somebody who was willing to push himself gave us the best possible result.
Critics would argue that that was a negative thing, that it was placing effects and spectacle above acting and talent and humanity. But if you look back at films of Hollywood, there's always been spectacle movies. I mean, back to Cleopatra or Ten Commandments, it was always about big effects and grand set pieces and locations. The only thing that was different about Friday the 13th was that in this case it was gore. And that was a hot thing at the time. That was a new boundary to push. And again, in the early 70s, it was porn. Suddenly you could be sexually explicit. And you had films like Midnight Cowboy, which got an X rating and won Best Picture. Suddenly it was dark subject matter. But in the 80s, it just happened to be gore. That was the new frontier to push. And again, Friday the 13th wasn't the first film that did that either. I mean, you look at Herschel Gordon Lewis movies, even Last House on the Left had a couple of very graphic scenes, but this was the first time that the film was marketed specifically to tell people you're going to see 6 or 7, or in this case people thought 13, really creative, shocking deaths, and you're not going to know how it was done. It's like a magic trick. And that's other, I think, aspect of the makeup, which is what's so brilliant about what Tom Savini did in this movie, is that it's not off-putting. I mean, some people, of course, were disgusted by it, but kids, clapped. And I think the reason they clapped wasn't because, there was this sort of bloodlust was coming out in them. They wanted to see people murdered. It was like a magic trick. I was like, how in the hell did they do that? Bill Frieda, editor.
Kids have a great sense of humor. They have this tongue-in-cheek sense of humor, kids. They're just perfect. And that's what this had. I really think this had a touch, that touch of humor in it. It wasn't serious. Nobody was really dying. And, and these kids loved the way it happened.
When you see Kevin Bacon get killed, it should be something where you're gagging, where you're running out into the lobby saying, I'm so disgusted, but you're like, oh my God, how do they do that? And you're gasping, because it's like cool, because you realize there's no CGI back then. It had to be done live on the set in front of the camera. And here you see Kevin Bacon reacting with his face, so it's really him, and yet you see the arrow coming through his throat, and people are just shocked at how could that be done. So people want to know how it was done. Again, it's like going to Vegas and seeing David Copperfield saw a girl in half. No one complains that that's in bad taste or disgusting, because everyone knows it's a magic trick, and Friday the 13th is exactly the same thing. Again, that's why I think some of the not some of the sequels, but a lot of the slasher imitators actually went too far, especially the ones, a lot of them started to go for the unrated rating. Like you saw that with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, for example, which was supposed to be a big selling point of the film. We're going to do it unrated, and then you watch it, and it's just gore for gore's sake. There's no build-up. It's just blood shooting out from tubes, and that by itself isn't interesting either. So I think what Friday the 13th did, that is not given credit for, is it had this great structure where it had kids you kind of liked and you rooted for. It had that roller coaster ride, the build up to suspense and the payoff, and then on top of that, it gave you the cool magic trick just for a few seconds. And if you look at the violence in Friday the 13th, and you add it up, there's only about 45 or 46 seconds of gore in the whole entire film. So everyone criticized the movie as being this bloodbath of blood all over the place, but very similar to Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, although less so. There really isn't that much blood in the film. If it was just about blood and guts, you could simply put together a 20-minute reel of people getting stabbed and people would love it. But people don't like that. And they do want some character, and they want some fun, they want the popcorn ride. And the gore just was sort of like an exclamation point at the end of the sentence. And that's really all the film did that was new. It took old elements that proved to be popular and added a little twist to it.
What I liked mostly about the way that Sean directed and produced the film was that in terms of gross violence, there's very little, but I mean, in terms of making the tension work, I thought it was fabulous. And yes, there's a hatchet in the face and there's an arrow that comes up through Kevin Bacon's neck or chest, though he tends to forget that he was ever there. I thought what the slasher films forgot that followed us, what the few I've seen, basically thought that the more gore and blood, the scarier it would be. And I don't think that's true. I think what Sean put together was a really good roller coaster ride in terms of a tight movie. I mean, I basically, as a kid, I'd always looked under my bed before I went to sleep. And so when it came time to write Friday the 13th, I had Betsy Palmer underneath Kevin Bacon's camp bed and shoving arrows up through his body. So, I kind of took care of a lot of my my early childhood fears by writing this thing.
When Victor and I were playing with this, we were very aware that what we needed to do was create something that had an element of circus in it. And so that with the special effects, at this point we had an MPAA and so on, we knew that we could get up to a certain level. But if we crossed the level, you'd get what would be today called an X rating, and it would be a bad thing. So that what we tried to do is get as invested as we possibly could in the story and in the anticipation of the payoff, and then to get through the payoff quickly and as efficiently as possible. What was interesting was that when we made the television version, the pretty much gore-less version of the film, we wound up cutting, I think, maybe a total of 20 seconds from the movie of all of the extreme gore. But so that there wasn't that much of it. I didn't think that there would be any real point in washing the audience in blood. And I found that to be counterproductive. It's kind of like the relationship between pornography and sexy erotic storytelling. That when all of a sudden the specifics are presented, it's not what you think, and it's off-putting, and it doesn't take you to the right fantasy places.
The impact of Friday the 13th on the horror genre, from my point of view, because I'm, as I said right off at the beginning, I am not a horror film aficionado, seemed to be to create a lot of epigonai, a lot of followers who just decided that blood was king, and so that they had these movies where there were heads in refrigerators, and and the more blood, the more gore, the more sort of anatomically correct you could be in cutting people up, that the people would love it. And I think that the genius of Sean in putting this movie together was in showing just enough. I mean, when the movie was finally released on network television, they did not have to cut out that many seconds of gore, and I think that's a tribute to it, because it's about the build-up to the tension. It's about the don't go in there's. It's about, oh, don't go in there. And then, of course, you get the one shot with the hatchet in the face, which is, of course, the styrofoam hatchet glued onto the real face.
There's been a big change that's taken place over the last 20 years in for want of a better word, the horror film. There used to be special effects, and special effects were like a magic show. And you did tricks for the camera. You would kill somebody. Now, you're sitting in the audience and you know that person didn't get killed, but you don't know how it happened. And central in that assumption is that the camera is an impartial observer. That's no longer the case. They know that the camera can hook up with a computer and a camera can do anything. So whereas it used to be that you believed what you were looking at, now we're skeptical. We don't believe anything that's been photographed because we know it can be changed and manipulated. There was a long time before that existed where it was like photographing a magic show. It is no longer. Consequently, at the point in time we did Friday the 13th, we did a gag with an arrow coming through the neck or a head being chopped off or something like that. Well, of course it didn't happen, but people had never seen it happen before. There weren't computers out there doing it for you. And it was like, how did that happen? It's so cool. Then, as these magic tricks got better, as it were, they became more and more medically accurate. But you find out that it doesn't work particularly well because you've lost the delight, the childish delight of, I got fooled, I got tricked by the camera, I don't know how it happened, with sort of a cynical, well, I saw that last week, show me something I haven't seen. And you're not going to trick the audience. Consequently, that delight having been removed, you better replace that delight with something else. That something else is the unexpected character and story twists, which get ignored. But in fact, because they're hard, but that's where the future's got to be in this genre. It's not going to be in bigger and better and more graphic gore and special effects. That's just a tool. But you have to be telling a story in an unexpected and in a way that somehow or other it creates a resonance with something that you know is true. It goes back to that sense of the fairy tale. If you do that, you'll have a story to tell and people want to see. Otherwise, any film student these days can go out and do just drop-dead special effects, and nobody will care. That's the really sad part. So much work goes into this stuff, and nobody cares, because we've seen it before.
Peter Bracke. By far, probably the most criticized aspect of Friday the 13th and the slasher films is that they equated promiscuity with violent death. Victor Miller, screenwriter.
My lead female survivor needed to be virginal in some way. So she had to be smarter than everybody else. She could not be driven by the same lusts and animal appetites that everybody else was that made them stupid. I mean, again, it's that wonderful archetype of there's one person who has a clue, and she's running around saying, you know, I think there's a problem here, and everybody else is saying, shut up, you're just not getting any. And I think that part of her character, keeping her a little bit smarter and a little less lustful, made it part of the wonderful Puritan background that we all share. I was certainly raised that if you make love before you're married, you are going to get punished somehow. And of course, this is just that written hugely, horribly large.
If you look at Friday the 13th very closely, it's very clear that the Adrienne King character is not a virgin. She's shown at the beginning of the film as having had a sexual relationship with Steve Christie, a much older man. She's seen openly flirting with the Bill character. In the scene of Strip Monopoly, she smokes pot with everyone else. She's certainly not a virgin. She's far from a prude. Yet she emerges victorious. She's smart and she's resourceful. And she fights back just as strongly as Jamie Lee Curtis does in Halloween, which ironically was a film that was highly praised. Now, another thing that's interesting, too, about Friday the 13th is that in terms of the victims, as many men are done in by the killer as women. And in fact, most of the most vicious murders are saved for the male characters. Kevin Bacon gets an arrow through his throat, which is probably the most violent moment in the film. Bill is arrowed to a door, almost in a sort of a weird crucifixion, sort of a pseudo-crucifixion like Jesus Christ. So if anything, Mrs. Voorhees reserves her wrath most for the male characters. And of course, further confusing the whole matter is the killer, of course, is a woman. And another thing that the critics highly criticized about the film was that it supposedly showed independent, sexually promiscuous females being hacked by a male killer who was bearing down on them from a sort of a point of view shot. But if you watch the movie, while there are some point of view shots in the film, as she's stalking the victims, when the actual murders happen, they're always shot from a third-person perspective. You never ever see someone getting killed from the gaze of Mrs. Voorhees. So you could argue that the killer is indeed coded as male throughout the film. Like you see it turns out to be a woman, of course, but you see Mrs. Voorhees' shoes, an arm, a knife. So you think, oh, it's a man. You just assume it's a man. But if anything, I would argue that Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham both knew that everyone would go in thinking the killer was a man. So by setting it up by looking like a man, it's really just to fool the audience so they won't expect that it's a woman. It's not, I don't think, to try to connect some sort of misogynistic, threatening male gaze onto the audience or to get to incite people to think like a psychopathic killer. I think it's just to confuse people so they'll be shocked when Mrs. Voorhees shows up and it turns out to be a woman. You know, again, it's unlike Halloween or most of the other slasher films. It's actually set up like a mystery. It's very much like Psycho or, again, an Agatha Christie movie or story where you don't know who the killer is, and that's part of the fun is guessing who it is. And so by coding the killer as male, it simply tricks the audience. But again, you never ever see any sort of point of view shots bearing down on a cringing woman half-dressed getting stabbed. It's always the third person, again, to highlight the sort of magical aspect of the effects of, gee, how did they do that? It's more like a funhouse than it is some sort of misogynistic anti-female statement. And then the last thing is that what the film actually does is actually link sexual repression with violent murder, unlike Halloween, where the Jamie Lee Curtis character is sexually repressed, and that's linked with her ability to sort of see the character. In this case, it's clearly stated at the end of the film that Mrs. Voorhees has gone mad because her son drowned at the hands of inattentive counselors, and she's shown as being a sort of a repressed, very mannish type of person. So in a way, you could link her repressed sexuality, her inability to deal with it, as kind of coming out as sort of a rage. So if anything, the film equates sexual repression with rage, saying that sexual repression is bad. If you repress your feelings and your emotions, it's a negative thing. And the people who are sexually promiscuous die equally, and the lead is sexually promiscuous. So there really doesn't seem to be any really clear link between virginity and purity and living in this film. So I continue to be baffled by that whole statement. I don't know where the whole virgin as hero came from. That really started with Halloween, and yet that movie was far more praised than Friday the 13th, but yet that film connects, again, promiscuity with violent death far more than Friday the 13th ever did. Sean S. Cunningham, producer and director.
I never bought into the notion of sex equals death, or that try to make the statement that other people have danced around with, that that the reason everybody gets punished in horror films is because they're sexually promiscuous and so on. That wasn't my intention. And in fact, I think that diminishes the form at some level. The scariness comes from bad things happening to good people for no apparent reason. And reconciling yourself to the fact that evil and bad things are out there, and they don't care whether you're nice to your mom or not. We think that we protect ourselves by being nice to our mothers, being polite, by being good people, going to church and doing all the good things. But gnawing in the back of our minds some places the notion that may not protect us. And it's the image that comes to mind is the shark's point of view in Jaws, where you look up and all of these people are out swimming, and all you see from the shark's point of view is legs, lunch. And he's not saying, who's the bad person, or who's the good person I'll stay away from. He's just looking for lunch. And it's just as cold as that. And the fear of that, I think, is at the root as the basic archetype for this genre.
Adrienne King, who played Alice.
Then Gloria invited me to a convention once, and that's the first time I got a sense of how many fans there really were for this movie. And for me, I was shocked. And they would all ask me that question, did you live because you didn't take your clothes off? Or did you live because you were a good girl, And I said, I don't know why I lived, except I just had a mean swing, And that's really, me and my machete.
I mean, if anything, this movie is about a mother figure gone amok, and Victor Miller has talked about that on many occasions, that Mrs. Voorhees is actually partially based on his own mother. So if anything, it's mother love gone wrong, and here's a woman that will do anything to protect her son. It's anything saying the dangers of that, the dangers of possessiveness and clinginess, and the kids who are most carefree are the victims. I mean, it's supposed to be a tragedy. You're not supposed to want to be Mrs. Voorhees. You're supposed to, again, these aren't deep characters, but you're really not supposed to side with the killer and say, isn't it great that she's killing people? You're not supposed to say, gee, kids who smoke pot or have sex deserve to die. That's never really stated anywhere in the film. If anything, Mrs. Voorhees is the old coot who's of a different era. She's of the 50s. She's of the past. Kids, they looked at her as like the crazy old grandma they were afraid of. I think that's why the film was really scary in many ways. And I agree. I actually find Mrs. Voorhees scarier than Jason because she's a real person. And she's gone mad, and that's a little scarier than a guy in a hockey mask who's kind of a one-note villain. Betsy Palmer, who played Mrs. Voorhees.
I'm very sincere about being an actress, and I really worked on this role to make her justifiable. In fact, it was like kind of almost saying my own life, because I lived at that same time. I decided that she was in high school, had gone steady with this boy, and in those days, girls did not go to bed. I said, they did make love. She became pregnant. And then when she began to show her pregnancy, first of all, she told the boyfriend, and he said, oh, no, don't brush it off on me. No. I'm not responsible for this. So then she had to tell her parents, and her father got mad that father kicks her out of the house. She's wandering, and I figured, well, maybe the Salvation Army took her in as they did unwed mothers. And I have the child. I have never even graduated from high school. I don't know how to earn a living. And this one summer, they said I could cook and wash dishes at this scout camp. And I thought, how wonderful for my little boy, Jason. He can come to the camp and he can play with the other children.
Victor Miller.
I never actually thought of whether there was a Mr. Voorhees in the past. There had to have been, because that's Jason's pop, assuming he had one. I guess if we had to sort of noodle about it, Mr. Voorhees took one extra look at Mrs. Voorhees and said, I'm out of here, and left them. But that's a good thought. I mean, if I had written one of the sequels, I might have found out exactly how he passed from the scene.
I didn't get up there and try to play a bad lady. In fact, I tried to play a good lady who'd gone a little wrong, but that was because She wanted to save more children. She didn't want them to die. What's wrong with that? You know, that's a mighty cause. And so I said to a girl once, I was on doing a radio show, and it was a call-in, and I said to her on the phone, I said, why? Tell me, why do you all love Mrs. Voorhees so? She said, because we know why you did it. We understand. I'm serious. So I was not going to argue with that. I thought, oh, I am an actress after all.
It's another thing that's really, I think, I don't want to say admirable, but what's kind of exciting in terms of a horror film about Friday the 13th is it almost feels like a documentary. These are just real, natural, average people. There's no lightning, you know, no monsters coming out of the ground. This could really happen. I mean, I think that's why it was so terrifying as a kid, because every kid goes to summer camp. That's the other brilliant thing about the location, is that like Halloween, it's set in a very middle-class, ordinary environment. And I think in the 70s, I think what really turned the tide was Charles Manson. When those murders happened, suddenly everyone realized that, oh my God, at any moment, someone could come into my house and kill me. So I think these films are very much of their time, because people were very, very scared by random and unmotivated, faceless violence. And that's exactly what this film was. You never saw the killer until the end. It was just something creepy's out there, you don't know it, it's eerie, and then it just comes and kills you for no reason. So when people say, oh, it's about some morality tale, again, it's simply a function of this is what kids do. This is what kids want to see. They smoke pot, they goof around, they have fun. And it had nothing to do with morality. I mean, I don't think Sean Cunningham or Victor Miller sat around and said, you know, I'm going to make a big statement about, you know, how horrible smoking pot is, and kids shouldn't have sex, and let's kill them off. I mean, it's just, let's make some money. I think one of the most fascinating aspects of the Friday the 13th phenomenon, at least now 20-odd years later, is that I think the film has become embraced by a lot of different subcultures and different groups. And one of those that is, I think probably would really surprise the filmmakers is that gay men especially have come out, a lot of them have come out and talked openly about how much they love slasher movies. And I guess when you look at it and you think about it, there are some, you can draw some pretty obvious, you know, parallels between the experience of a gay man coming out, and the experience that the heroines in this movie have. Adrienne King is a good example, the Alice character, in that the character starts out being carefree and knows something is happening, but she's not sure what it is. And then suddenly the horror becomes more overt. She starts discovering what's going on, and suddenly she's aware of this horrible, awful thing going on in the world, in this case, which is violence, that people are capable of murder, that violence exists and evil exists. So in a way, the character coming out and accepting the presence of death and mortality could be seen as equivalent to a man's coming out experience, in that it's dangerous and scary. And it's also interesting about these movies is a lot of the gay men really related to the violence and the gore effects, which I guess you could argue because it's very much it's all about sensation. It's about the flesh. It's about discovering. It's about looking at the body and exposing sort of the tenuous relationship we have between life and death. And it's all focused on the flesh. The arrows coming out of the flesh. People getting stabbed and slit. And I think people going through, you know, sexual awakening, whether it's gay or otherwise, are completely obsessed with their bodies. I mean, your hormones are changing. You're getting pimples. Your body's changing. It's a really awkward, awful time. And especially, I think, for gay men and lesbians, it's even more acute because they're so focused on themselves and they're being told that it's bad and ugly and awful. So, you know, you're watching kids who are physically perfect get killed and mutilated. And I think, and I'm not even sure fully what that connection is, but certainly there have been a number of articles written, a number of young filmmakers who are now making horror movies, for example, who have come out who are gay and been very highly influenced by films like Halloween and Friday the 13th. So there seems to be a connection between the gay man, the male experience of coming out, and the experience of the heroines that they seem to identify with in these movies, having to come through a very traumatic situation, but come out stronger. And the other thing that's interesting, for example, like Jamie Lee Curtis's, these characters tend to be kind of loners. Even Adrienne King is sort of separate from all the other counselors. She's not friends with them. She's already at the camp, and they're like strangers, so she's always sort of an outsider. So the heroines in these movies are part of a community, but not quite attached to it. So I think gay men especially can really relate that sort of outsider quality, and that sort of thing that you're going to be left alone, you're going to have to fight the evil and fight the force by yourself. And so I think a lot of outsider type characters, again, doesn't have to be gay men. I think anyone who's an outsider. I think that's another reason why these films appeal to such a cult audience, because a lot of the people that go to the conventions and love horror movies and Star Trek or whatever are more of the outsider characters. They were lonely as kids. I certainly was. Movies were my friend. Movies and music and books. So I could go to a movie and I could feel a kinship with the characters. I knew what it felt like to be an outsider. So, and then going to this place, this camp, which is all American, and still feeling like an outsider is something you can really relate to emotionally. Bill Frieda, editor.
The editing process took 10 weeks, and I keep mentioning that because we really kept watching on that, and I must give kudos to Sean for that. He was really perfect with that, and it was a great way to work. You know, it was a low-budget film. Let's not get into, you know, any artistic kind of atmosphere here. Let's just get it done, and that's what it was, you know.
Harry Manfredini, the composer of Friday the 13th.
Music is always most important in this film, and in most pictures, when it starts and when it ends. It's got to have a time to come in. That's got to be that one place, like uh-oh, or in this case, you know, an uh-oh sort of thing. But even, let's say it was a, you know, a comedy or a romantic picture or something like that, there's a certain place where you might be playing the character or you might be playing the audience. When you want the audience to start to buy in, or when you're feeling the emotion is a place where it starts, you've got to ease the music in at that point. It's horrible when the music starts and everybody hears it start. It's almost like you shouldn't notice it come in. And especially if you're trying to get the audience to relax, you shouldn't notice the music go out either. Everyone knows if you're going to do this kind of picture, you have no choice but to start thinking about Hitchcock and in that case Bernard Herrmann. So, I mean, you can't go to any horror film and not find Bernard Herrmann somewhere in the score, and that includes myself and Jerry Goldsmith, or any of the the really great Hollywood composers, including the new guys too. You just hear it everywhere. Penderecki that's where the beginning of the infamous Jason sound started. I was studying I'm always studying somebody, and I was studying his music, and very strange, complicated music, and it was a choral piece in which he had the chorus not just singing normally, but also sometimes in the middle of things the chorus would go or make a sound that was vocal in nature but not a word, not a singable sort of sound. And I thought that was really sort of a cool idea. Now obviously I don't have a chorus, I don't have anything. Basically I've got me. So I got this idea from the picture. If you're watching the picture, you'll see at the very end, when Betsy Palmer finally gets into the film, we find out that she's Jason's mom. There's a close-up of Betsy Palmer's mouth, and obviously she was someone who, I'm guessing, heard voices. And the mouth is going, "Kill her, mommy," and it goes back and forth from her voice to a child's voice, and back and forth. So she was hearing this in her head. So I got the wacky idea to take "Kill Her, Mommy," the first two letters of "kill," K-I, and "ma," M-A, and then there was a gizmo we had called an echoplex, which we were using a lot in the film. For example, when I would hit the piano or pluck the strings, it would, obviously it would just go blang, but we would make it go blang, blang, blang. It would just be an echoplex. Now we have digital echoplex and all sorts of things. But at the time, that's what we had. So anyway, I went to the microphone, and I don't know why, but I just went, and it went, then I went, and it went, and whoa, I went, that's pretty spooky. So I decided, what I did was, it was just sort of like there was so much POV in this film of, my joke is it's the POV of the cameraman. It was supposedly Jason's POV, like when Jason was there, we never saw him, or in this case, it turns out to be Betsy Palmer. But when the killer was watching, I wanted to create a presence so that it wasn't just, it was above and beyond the cameraman. It was, uh-oh, this person's in trouble. So I came up with this, and the next thing you know, but that's actually me, and it's always been me. I actually have samples of it now, so I just have to push a key. I don't even have to work very hard. I just go.
Sean S. Cunningham, producer and director.
We had a very strong piece of work that we took to the MPAA, and they asked us to make a couple of cuts, or they didn't call out the cuts, and we had to make a few cuts, but basically they let the film go through pretty much in the form that we expected or hoped for. Subsequently, it became held up as an example of, well, you let Friday the 13th go by, and now you're telling us we can't do that? They did this. As a result, later on when I went back to the MPAA for other movies, I always felt that I had a very difficult time. I don't know that I really had a more difficult time than somebody else might have, but I always felt that they might have thrown me a softball once and then lived to regret it. The truth is that the MPAA is, as far as censorship goes, is a political committee. And it's meant to change. It's meant to go with public opinion and the like. Because what it does is it creates a world in which we can make any film we want. They don't tell you you can't make that movie. They say if you make that movie, you'll get an X rating. People may not come, but nobody tells us what we can and can't make, and that's really the MPAA.
Jay Cooper, assistant editor.
Sean had set up Paramount to start looking at some stuff through his connections there. So we were finishing a scratch mix and boxing up 10 reels of edited work picture with the 10 reels of scratch mix. I took the box from the mix place to Paramount, and it turns out we did not include the last reel. And the Paramount executives watched the whole film and then didn't see the ending. I thought I'd never work in this town again. I better just move to Europe. I mean, I'm not sure I left the reel out, but somebody in the excitement left the reel out. We rescheduled a screening. I was to drive the film into Paramount. Next morning, one of the biggest snowstorms to hit the East Coast in 10 years. I got to Paramount about 3 hours after the screening was to have happened. And apparently they had, again, a room full of executives ready to watch this film for the second time, and no film showed up. Finally, they got to see the film, and as they say, the rest is history.
Bill Frieda.
We had screenings for ourselves, but then we had the first screening that I recall for Paramount. And I do remember that very distinctly because I feel I had a big, heavy hand in that, frankly. I'm working the board in the back. And if you recall the ending, when that head pops up, when that's Betsy Palmer, Jason pops up. When we were doing scratch music, Sean would bring us some music, and we would lay it in. And there was one piece that he brought, and I had sort of moved it in and out. And at that moment when that head came out, there's this huge bang. And I remember at the first screening that we had for ourselves, I would take that, that gang and just go crazy with it. And it would shake, So I did the same thing, and Sean wasn't saying, hey, look, at the next screening, I mean, it was just something we were doing. And I bounced that thing up. I swear people just jumped out of it. And I think that's the thing that sold it. I really do. I think this guy sat there and said, even if you buy this movie for the ending, it's going to be cheap. Why not do it?
We started to screen it for distributors, and it had just incredible success because mostly it was the sucker punch that happened in the last reel. And guys would watch it and get scared and delighted, and then they would get, taken out of their seats at a couple of moments, particularly one at the end. And they loved it. And they loved then all of a sudden setting up another screening and bringing in all the secretaries and all the other guys, and they would sit in the back and wait. wait, and all of a sudden, they'd jump up and they'd laugh and they hit each other and go on. And it was exactly that kind of fun that created this little bidding war between United Artists, Warner Brothers, and Paramount.
Harry Manfredini.
We had a ball screening it. We knew it was working. I mean, I knew it was scary before I even put the music in because I thought it was scary already. But the fun thing is that we did do a few test screenings, and like I said before, Sean and I used to sit. First of all, I like to sit close up in theaters, so I don't care if I come late. There's always room in the first couple rows, and I like to get the whole thing in. But we used to sit in as close as we could, and then what we would do, and Sean was so funny because he got the biggest kick out of this, as something horrible was about to happen, we would both slide down in our seats and get way down like where you couldn't see us, and then we'd spin around, and actually instead of watching the picture, we would watch the audience, and something would happen, and I'm not kidding you. You just see people flying out of seats and bouncing and things like that. And Sean would just go like, I got them all. There was like about 200 people jumped, so I got every one of them on that.
Victor Miller, screenwriter.
The film was released in early May 1980. I think it was like May 6th or May 8th, I've forgotten which. And the next thing I knew, it was an instant success. I mean, I went the first night to a little movie theater in Milford, Connecticut with some friends, and we saw it. And it was fun seeing an opening night. Nobody knew it was opening. I mean, nobody knew who I was or cared. And I'm sitting in the movie theater, and the movie, they all enjoyed it. And at the end of the film, when Adrienne King does in poor old Betsy Palmer, 3/4 of the theater got up and started heading for the exit. And then when the remaining quarter of moviegoers screamed, they all whipped around and stared at the screen and saw Jason coming out of the water. And that was wonderful for me. I was surprised. I had no idea that the mechanics of the film would work quite that way, that people would actually be leaving before the credits and would be nailed to the floor after the poor little kid comes out of the water.
Even if it was rather crudely made in terms of the way it was shot and edited, and some people would say the caliber of the acting, I think it is, especially if you listen to this commentary, it is very clear that Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham knew what they were doing. Again, you could argue with how successful it was, but to say that they had no concept of what they were doing or no goal in mind when they structured the film, I don't think that would be accurate. It's very clearly patterned and laid out. It's actually a very strong structure. You have a half hour of opening where you introduce the characters and everything seems happy and hunky-dory. Then you have a middle half hour where one by one the counselors are killed off, and then you have the last half hour where you're introduced to the killer and you have the long chase scene. So in that sense, it really gives the audience pleasure in that it's very well paced. There's always something happening. There's always something to look forward to. There's always a sort of an overwhelming sense of dread that something bad is going to happen. So in that sense, I think the film is very well structured. And I think that's why it's inspired 9 sequels and countless other imitations. I mean, if it didn't have the structure, no one would have liked it. It would have disappeared. But you can't rip off a movie a zillion times if it doesn't work in some sense in the first place. So obviously something about it worked. And people weren't going for a star. They were going to see, the thrills and chills, and that's what the film delivered like clockwork. Jay Cooper, assistant editor.
Friday the 13th, kind of became its own little industry, didn't it? I think Friday the 13th was an attempt to just make a horror movie that would hopefully make a few dollars, and yet it turned into a cultural phenomenon.
Sean S. Cunningham, producer and director.
I'd like to go on record to say that when we made Friday the 13th, we had no clue that we would ever have a sequel. The sequels weren't made. You made a sequel to Jaws, maybe, but you didn't make sequels to horror films. So that was never part of our plan. Having Jason come up out of the lake was a device. It wasn't a story device. It was a magic device. It was for the audience. It was justifiable, but it wasn't meant to be the beginning of a story. We started talking about doing a sequel within days, really, of the initial success. And that came directly from Paramount, who said that they wanted to book more. People are coming to this, book more. And you killed 8 people, maybe next year you should kill 12 people. Like that. And I thought that what we would do is we would use Friday the 13th as a sort of a tentpole name for scary movies. My friends in Boston felt it was really important to bring back this Jason character. Well, I thought that was just the worst idea I ever heard. He wasn't your villain, he was just a figment of somebody's imagination, blah, blah, blah. Well, I was completely wrong. And in fact, Jason came back, and he's still with us today. He has become a pop icon. He's the icon of the boogeyman. And, you know, I understand the character he became much more than I understand, you know, the character that he was initially. But, you know, most people don't realize that Jason as a character really wasn't in Friday the 13th. It was his mom.
Victor Miller, screenwriter.
Jason, to my way of thinking, is a growth that came out of the movie, and a couple of choices that Sean made, because it was never my intention that Jason be the central character in Friday the 13th. But then I didn't write it with thinking about sequels either. Jason was just, to me, a nice little boy who drowned. But because of the nature of the nightmare ending, and because Sean had Tom Savini on board as such a fabulous makeup artist, they turned him into sort of a monstrous-looking cretin or some sort of child who really perhaps should not have been alive in the first place. I mean, he just looked awful when he came out of that water. And of course, that made the chair jumper at the end so much better. But it was never my intention that this be a deformed child.
Betsy Palmer, who played Mrs. Voorhees.
I say to these audiences, you know, they ask me to come and sign autographs, and people come from all over the world that love horror films. And I say to them, I say, you know, you've been taken for a ride. I said, I don't know who this guy in the hockey mask is. I said, I'm insane. I'm crazy, but I'm not insane. I said, I would never have done what I did to Camp Blood or whatever they call it now. I said, I would never, if my little boy hadn't drowned, I said, he's at the bottom of the lake. So, hockey schmocky mask, you know, I don't know.
That idea in itself had a life of its own and kept on going in all of the subsequent movies. I certainly, it was never my idea to put a hockey mask on anybody because I had nothing to do with parts 2 through whatever. Because as I say, my favorite character is Mrs. Voorhees. She was the crowning villain. She's the wonderful achievement of my life. And so the idea that Jason would come back to life, because, I mean, clearly he was already dead at the beginning of the movie. His death was the cause of all of this. And so that he would be spun out. I mean, obviously he was very successful for all the sequels, but it was never my intention that he be that kind of a kid.
So again, I can understand the criticism leveled at the film, but in hindsight, it's even more ironic to me too, because the mainstream critics at the time, like Roger Ebert, Gene Siskel, Rex Reed, Leonard Maltin, every single one unanimously came out and vilified this film. Yet these are the same people that grew up on those schlocky B movies of the 50s and 60s, which they always praised. So it's very strange that they would not see this, and they at least couldn't relate to why kids might like this. Because really all this did was took it to the next step. Instead of kids necking in the parked cars with the Wolfman coming behind them, now they could show kids having sex, smoking pot, and getting killed a little bit more graphically. But the film is the same thing. It's no different than, you know, Lobster Man from Mars. It's just, you know, it's more modern. You know, the kids are, obviously it's dated now. You look at the clothes and the styles and the fashions, but back then this is what kids look like. This is how they acted. This is what they did. I mean, you have kids at summer camp. Of course, they're going to have sex, smoke pot, drink, and goof off, and that's what they're going to do. So it's just, so to me, yeah, I'm completely bewildered still at how all the critics and the parents groups overreacted towards this film. And again, by overreacting, all they did was make kids want to see it more. So I don't know if Friday the 13th is brilliant, but it certainly was clever. And it's certainly very clear that Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller knew exactly what they were doing. They had studied the genre, they knew it was popular, and they capitalized on what they thought kids wanted to see, and they turned out to be right. So in a way, you could simply just argue that critics are simply being spoiled sports. Because someone said, hey, I'm going to make a movie that's fun. It's a popcorn movie. I want it to make money. It's going to deliver what the audience wants. It's not going to be an art film. It's not the auteur theory. It's not a filmmaker trying to make a grand statement. It's just, I'm going to show you a good time. And that's always looked down upon by critics and by cinema elitists.
The resistance to the genre probably occurred much later as dozens of low-budget horror and gore-oriented films started to find a regular audience with teenagers that parents and educators would say, this is not a productive use of your time. You know, don't do this. We're against this. Stop making these movies. And the people certainly have a point. It's something that you do occasionally, but it wouldn't be something that you want to do on a really regular basis.
So the film comes out. It's a huge hit. The filmmakers make it. They prove themselves right. Critics hate it, so of course they're going to rip it apart. And you could argue that critics are just frustrated filmmakers anyway. So what's interesting now is that I think today a film like this, no one would bat an eye. Now it's very common for even mainstream huge filmmakers like Scorsese or Spielberg to make a popular popcorn movie for the audience, and they make their personal movie, and they go back and forth. But back then, I think in the late 70s, the auteur theory was all the rage. So I think people, craftsmen like, for example, John Carpenter or Sean Cunningham, people who made movies for the audience based on the B movies they loved as a kid, were frowned upon. Now I think they'd be praised. So you could maybe argue that part of the backlash against Friday the 13th and spectacle movies like this at the time was simply, bad timing. It was simply the era. It just wasn't cool to make movies that were unabashedly commercial.
I don't think that the Friday the 13th, certainly not Friday the 13th, wasn't meant to be misogynistic. And it certainly wasn't anti-women, and it wasn't trying to demean women. We didn't exploit nudity particularly. We killed democratically. But I think that when you try to overanalyze this stuff, you can get yourself into a big mess. Is there exploitation of women for material gain in movies? Sure. That doesn't make it a good thing or a bad thing. It just exists. And then you can choose to go to the movie or not. You can choose to make the movie or not. But there's always going to be some version of a girly calendar that's going to exploit women. But by the way, there are also calendars with motorcycles that exploit motorcycles, and there's also all kinds of gay calendars that exploit, that. It's just part of our culture, and I think you make too big a deal out of it, you do yourself a disservice.
It's kind of fun, because there I was writing in 1979. The sexual revolution had gone swinging past me, and I'm writing a movie which is hugely moralistic. I wasn't quite aware of that until after the movie came out, and people started throwing darts at me and it, and all the kinds of things about the feminists didn't like it particularly, and there were hundreds of reasons not to like Friday the 13th unless you really just enjoyed the movie.
Adrienne King, who played Alice.
I actually thought it was an empowering position for me. I lived. I killed the killer, I didn't look at it that way as, the victim, because I didn't consider myself a victim in that movie.
I think it's fair to hold Friday the 13th up to critical scrutiny of any kind, because after all, if we're going to put it out in the theaters, then that's fair game. And I don't think we can go whining around saying it's no fair to criticize us.
Yeah, I read some of the reviews. They were pretty funny. That we were all very nubile. I always remember New York Times describing the young camp counselors as nubile. And I think that's the only good word they had to say about us.
And I also think as a cultural event, Friday the 13th has some sort of importance. I'm not sure, you know, in terms of the larger culture, whether the fact that we have to kill virgins or I felt I had to kill virgins is significant, you know, I don't know. I certainly, you know, people have asked me whether I feel guilty. Have I written something that caused people to go off? You know, if there's a paranoid schizophrenic out there who's seen Friday the 13th 147,000 times, should I feel guilty if he goes out and murders somebody? And there are moments where I have a fleeting thought that, yeah, I guess I'm certainly somewhere in there. And then the other times I say, no, I think he was having his problems long before I got onto the scene. So I don't know quite what to make of the critics. I set out to write a roller coaster. It was the antidote to the family film myth. And we had a great deal of fun doing it, and I felt much better afterwards. I felt cleansed because I never had to look under my beds again.
I mean, I often tell people that it was very exciting to all of a sudden see Sean Cunningham hit it big. And I remember also one day him walking into an editing room, because by then we were already working on Friday the 13th Part 2, and saying, Jay, take a look at this. And he held up a check, paid to the order of Sean Cunningham, Paramount Pictures, you know, and Sean went out and bought a really nice car, and Steve Miner went out and bought a really nice car.
Friday the 13th made me a credible writer. Before that, even though I thought I was fairly credible, I'd written a lot of novels and novelizations and things like that, but suddenly there I was, and I was hot for about a minute and a half. Came out here, sold films to Columbia, things like that never got made. Went on and had a wonderful career in daytime soap opera, which was a lot of fun from 1982 on.
Betsy Palmer.
I was in Philadelphia doing Strindberg's The Father, and after the show at night, we'd go on our way back to the place where they were boarding all of us, and I would stop at a little grocery store to pick up some groceries for the kitchen, and I'd be with my little basket, you know, wheeling it, and I'd hear this, and I think, oh no, I'm just going to ignore that.
Yes, ma'am.
So I turn around and he said, I knew it was you. And then across the street, when I'd be walking maybe to rehearsal, there'd be a couple of boys, young boys, and they'd yell across, they'd say, kill her, Mommy, kill her, you know. Still get it, still happens. And now it's my claim to fame.
Harry Manfredini, the composer of Friday the 13th.
What was interesting was one guy who was at this lecture, he said, when I was at UCLA and USC, he went to USC. When I went to USC, he said, we studied that score so hard to try to figure out what you were doing. And I said, I'd love to find out what you discovered, because it was interesting. And he actually is a quite big composer right now, and there are a couple of guys who are working with him who are doing very well.
My relationship to the franchise is that I suppose I'm an executive producer. I have coordinated with New Line to make a Freddy versus Jason movie, which is currently being shot in Vancouver, and hopefully something fun will come out of that.
Who would have thought 20 years ago, 23 years ago, we were making a movie that was still going to be around and played every Friday the 13th and every Halloween. I mean, every Friday the 13th, I get calls from people I haven't heard from in a while. Oh, I was just thinking about you, you know. It's not going to die. It will go on forever. First of all, I think there's a whole brand new audience finding it. I know that my nieces and nephews that are 10, 11, 12, 13, my neighbors down the street, you know, it's kind of like they're all finding Friday the 13th for the first time, and they may not be taking it quite as seriously. It's more of a camp film now. That's what when I was watching it last night, I was laughing. I mean, it was fun to watch, because what was so scary back then now is just fluff, you know, and I think that's part of it. There's just some little magic dust over Friday the 13th, I don't know.
Peter Bracke, author of Crystal Lake Memories. Friday the 13th and its sequels are more than just a potent modern myth. Collectively, it's a story of how a talented team of actors, writers, producers, directors, and craftspersons changed the face of popular culture by jumping headfirst into the trenches of low-budget filmmaking. Through sheer courage and dedication, their commitment inspired legions of young actors and filmmakers the world over. This popular success generated unprecedented box office returns that helped to fund numerous important cinematic works outside of the franchise, and forever changed the way independent motion pictures were produced, marketed, and distributed. What was once an unassuming little low-budget shocker has left an unparalleled legacy that will continue to reverberate throughout the industry for years to come. So ends this audio commentary for Friday the 13th. I hope you enjoyed this trip back to Camp Crystal Lake and the making of the film that changed horror history forever. Until next time, just remember, they never found the body.
The preceding commentary was produced by Jeffrey Schwartz and the staff of Automat Pictures, Los Angeles.